Alrighty. Hello. Are we currently live?
It looks like it. Let me just make sure that people are. Yeah, we currently have 31 people on the stream.
All right, awesome. Okay, cool. And Shawnee, did you want to turn off your camera for now?
Oh, yes, thank you.
All right, awesome. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to CreateSC 2023. My name is Anna Sun, and I will be one of your co-hosts today. I'm currently a third year student. Oh, yes, I'm currently a third year student studying business administration, and I'm incredibly excited to be hosting this event to you all today alongside my co-host, Brian. Before we kick anything off, though, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Arella Young, who unfortunately, due to illness, could not be here to host this event herself, even though she and Brian planned this event very diligently over the past few months. So thank you so much, Arella, and I hope you get well soon. And over this weekend, Brian and I will be with you. But today we will make sure that your schedule is known, introduce you to some of our guests and our speakers, announce the prompt itself, and then around 12:45, so make sure to stick around.
And hi, everyone. My name is Brian Alvarado. Currently a graduate student at USC studying digital social media. Our team under Innovative Design, USC students run creative agency, has been working hard in the past few months, and we're thrilled to be finally able to share what we have in store for everyone. CreateSC first launched 4 years ago with the goal of offering creative individuals like you an opportunity to learn more about UI, UX design, and work together to solve and create amazing prototypes in response to our given prompt.
And this year we partnered with some wonderful organizations and judges to make this event possible. So we genuinely hope that you can use this experience as a learning in order to learn. We also wanted to give a special shout out and thank you to UXGO for sponsoring and hosting this event. UXGO is an amazing online design community where members can get mentorship from professionals within the design field. We're really looking forward to seeing what all of you proactive individuals have in store for us. So without further ado, here is the event schedule. So we already are kicking off, and we will go straight into keynote speaker within the next 10 minutes. And then after that, stick around for a Figma workshop. And then finally, we will be introducing the prompt and the submission guidelines around 12:45. So make sure to stick around. And tomorrow we will be having our finale around 6 p.m., where we will have our finalist presentations. We'll have our winners be announced, and of course, closing remarks. If you are a finalist, you will be notified by 4 p.m. And participants will all have 24 hours to work on design challenge. So starting at 1 p.m. today, you will start the design challenge. You'll be given the prompt, and then your submission will be due 1 p.m. tomorrow on Sunday.
Cool. And then tomorrow we'll reconvene to see the top 8 teams present their work live, and we'll conclude with the judging, awards, and the closing ceremony. But what are the awards, you might ask? Well, the first place team will receive $300 per team, a lifetime membership to UXGO, and free merch. The second place team will receive also lifetime membership to UXGO and merch. And the third place team will receive 50% off the UXGO membership and merch. But also there are honorary mentions, which will receive 50% off UXGO through a promotion code and UXGO keychains. And anyone who submits will also receive a 15% UXGO code redeemable for the next 3 months.
Yeah, so if you're not here to learn, you should be at least here for these amazing prizes. But yeah, and then of course, for all of you who do wish to learn, we will be starting off with our first speaker of the day, our keynote speaker, Leon Zhang, who is a product design lead at GoDaddy currently and a lead coach at UXGO, who has some previous experience with Amazon and a lot of other amazing companies. And now I'll pass it on to Leon.
Thanks. And I assume I can take over the share screen?
Yes, of course.
Okay, awesome. All right, hey everyone. Can everyone see my share screen?
Looks good for me.
Okay. So I'm going to present sort of not in the full view, just to have everyone be able to see kind of the front and back of the slide, since this is a very unique story. So starting off, thanks for the introduction. And if anyone's curious about my work experience, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you're a current student or a member at UXGO, you've probably done a lot of classes and learnings with me already. But if you haven't met me yet, I'm Leon, and I'm very happy to be here today and do this keynote for all of you. So the whole point of this deck that I wanted to share today is something I call the iceberg effect in the early UX career. So this is a very easy to understand metaphor, I believe, right? We are all familiar with what an iceberg is. So the iceberg starts off as something that you see only a little bit above the surface, right? If you don't know what an iceberg is, feel free to ask any questions on our YouTube live, but just think of like the Titanic, right? So they only see what is under the iceberg when it is too late, right? So that's the iceberg effect. It's usually something I would say that's negatively connotated, right? So when someone says it's an iceberg, it just means there is a lot more than what you see on the surface, right? So this is the first key learning of today. So why do we need to learn what an iceberg is? Well, we need to know what do we see above the surface and what do we see below the surface in UX design, okay? And once you learn what we see above the surface and below the surface, that's also something you can apply to your early career as well. So the first thing is, usually when you think of UX design, I put some little phones here, you immediately think of two things: high fidelity, prototype, right? You think about like the final design. So if you've done any learning with UXGO, or if you've done any sort of UX class yourself, whether it's like a certificate, bootcamp, whether it's through your master's program, then you know this is not what UX design really is, right? There is a lot more that happens below the surface, right? So to reach a final design, a final product that is on the phone, on the web, AR, VR, Web3, doesn't matter how new the technology is, you always have to think about what's under the surface, what you cannot see, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. There's research, there's ideation. Ideation also is known as brainstorming. There's iteration. Iteration, sometimes people combine it with testing, sometimes people combine it with ideation. But iteration just means making many different designs based off the same idea or based off of different ideas. And then we have testing. So testing is something that a lot of students do not do in their projects, but it's a big part in the industry. In the industry, when we do any sort of UX design, any sort of product design, we need to make sure our designs are actually validated, right? If our designs are not validated, then it means that the designs we ship, whatever people see, there's a high chance of it being bad, right? Because we don't have any data to know if people actually like it or not. So I wanted to share these 4 things of below the iceberg in UX first with everyone. I'm sure 90% of everyone who's listening to me right now already know this. So I don't think this is any new information to anyone, but think about this when you work on your hackathon projects today and early morning tomorrow, right? Without thinking about what's below the surface and focusing on above the surface, you will not be creating a good design. It does not matter how well the high fidelity looks. It does not matter how well the prototype looks. To be a good product, you need to have all these things below the surface. So even if you only have 24 hours to work on your project, this is what you need to think about. In other words, I know a lot of you probably know, this is my favorite diagram, the design process. So all of you who listened to the pre-workshop I gave last week, or the ones who've done advanced classes, right, with UXGO, with me, I know a lot of you are finishing your class this week, doing the final presentations. So great work there. I want all of you to know that the design process is something you need to use as well in your hackathon project. So I can't see everyone on YouTube right now because I'm sharing my deck on Zoom. But Shawnery, can you quickly let me know, are the students able to like comment or like react on the YouTube live as well?
Yep, it looks good. We've got some questions about how to attend the hackathon, but no questions on the slides yet.
Okay. So I'm gonna do a quick pause here because I want everyone to just quickly type either 1 or 2 on YouTube. If you've never heard of the design process or design thinking, please type 2. If you have, please type 1. And if you're a student from UXGO, I sure hope you type 1. If you're a student at any master's program, I sure hope you type 1. But if you've never heard of it, please type 2. So Shawnery, just quickly let me know, like if you see it's like 50-50 or how does it look?
Let's see. There's a little bit of a delay, so we probably won't get that live reaction.
Okay.
We've got 1-1 from Yuki.
Okay. Thank you.
Ones are trickling in. Yeah, a wave of ones coming in. Love to see it.
Any 2s?
Not yet.
There's no shame in typing 2, by the way. So no shame. Okay, so I'm assuming if it's mostly 1, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, right? Since I'm assuming everyone knows it. But let's just quickly look at some of the most important things. The first thing before you start the project is you want to make sure that you understand why you're doing it. So this is commonly known as like UX research. In a hackathon project specifically, you only have 24 hours. So the chances of you doing an actual interview is very low. Interview takes a lot of time. But if you're really into research and you want to do an interview, please go for it. Nothing against that. If you want to do a survey, you have a lot of friends who are ready to fill out a survey for you. That's also something you can consider. But usually what I recommend for a hackathon is rely on literature review, secondary research, literature study, whatever way you want to think of it. You can also call it like AKA Googling. So that's also totally fine. Make sure you use credible sources, right? Have other famous researchers do the work for you, right, is what I tell you. So spend the time you need to make sure you find the data to support the direction you want to do. So the first idea you have when you hear the prompt, right, I'm not going to announce the prompt yet, but when you hear the prompt, don't just immediately say like, okay, boom, let's go make the final design, final visual design. Make sure you're solving the right problem. So add your own constraints, right? All of you who've done like whiteboarding classes with me or done like any other interview prep with me, you know how important it is to define the problem, right? You do not want to just go boom into here, right? I mean, that's almost the last step. So you don't want to go there. So start from here, make sure you define things. Now, what I usually recommend everyone to do, this is, like up to you to decide if you want to do it or not. I recommend everyone to redefine the problem. Okay. So for those of you who haven't done any sort of like if this is your first design project, you may not know what a redefined problem means. So that just means rewriting the problem in a how might we format. Okay, so how might we how might we for millennials? How might we for Gen Z? How might we for Gen Z working at home, right? So the more detail you add, the easier it will be for you to ideate, right? Because if you say, how might we for Gen Z, you can probably ideate 1,000 ideas, right? Because it's such a vague problem. But if you say, how might we for Gen Z working at home, then you add the right constraints and you can make sure you ideate for something that is actually useful because it's added from your research. So after that, I think all of it is the easier part. So how to prototype, how to use Figma, how to use like visual design, how to make things look good. I'm sure all of you can do it. Something else I do recommend you do if you have time in your projects is make sure you actually test and validate things, right? This can be with people that maybe you do some research with. This can be with your friends. So just try to show that whatever you design to the judges, it's based on user or based on data, or there is something more to it than just looking good. And then of course, last but not least, looking good is important. So make sure it also looks good, right? But now that you've seen this diagram, I want to talk a little bit more about your careers, right? Because this design process, this design thinking, once you master it, you'll realize it's not just for UX design. It's for everything in life, right? It's for solving the smallest problems in life. It's for solving the bigger problems in life, including how to grow in your career, how to find a job, things like that. And then the last thing of this circular diagram you need to remember is the design process is not a linear thing. The design process is circular, meaning it goes round and round. So what that means is sometimes in your work, in your project, maybe you start with some existing designs, so you iterate on that, right? Maybe you start at the testing stage, so you go here. Maybe you start from here, you go here. And then even after you implement your final designs for this hackathon, and you want to put it on your website for your portfolio, or you want to do it for an interview, there is always more room to recontextualize it, right? There's always room to do more research. There's always room to improve it. So always remember, just like growing in your career, every project, every process, every design related thing, it's a circular process. It's not like straight from point A to point B. Okay, Shanri, if there's any other questions that students have about this, please just relay it over to me on Zoom. I'll try to answer it at the very end.
Yep, of course.
So now let's take a look back at what is above the surface. So let's think about what you think you see when you look at someone who's finding a job, right? So usually when you're a recruiter or when you're looking at your peers, when you're looking at your friends, when you're looking at people around you, you will see their jobs, you will see their degree, right? That's usually what people care about the most, right? Imagine all of you are adding someone on LinkedIn, right? You saw maybe they found the internship you really wanted. Maybe they went to this company you really wish you worked at. The first thing you probably look at is their job, their degree. So I know with UXGO right now, we have a lot of students sharing their offers they got. So I think this is something relatable to everyone. But once again, think about that iceberg effect. You want to think about what is all the things that they've done that maybe is not so easy for other people to see, right? What's their portfolio like? What kind of projects do they have? How did they do their portfolio? How did they do their storytelling? How did they prepare for their interview? How many interviews did they do in total to get to this point, right? How many interviews did they maybe fail to get to this point? Before they're getting paid for their work, right? A lot of people want to do UX design because they think the salary is good, right? So those are definitely not good reasons to be a designer. But look at the people that get the offer that you want, maybe at Google, Apple, Amazon, whatever big tech company, startup, doesn't matter. Ask them about what's the unpaid work they've done, right? How much effort did they actually put in before getting to that step? I'll talk a little bit more about my own experience today too, but a lot of this is things that people often overlook. And then lastly, talk about like, who are their mentors, right? How do they spend their time on their weekends? How do they prepare for their interviews? How do they do their coaching? How do they really grow, right? To get to this point that everyone sees on the outside, on the surface, right? Because it's so easy to overlook all these things that help create the tip that people see, right? So next time when you see someone who says like, I just accepted my offer, instead of all you see on their LinkedIn, really try to focus on these other aspects because that's what's going to help you. Just like when you do your design projects, you want to focus on building the foundation of the iceberg, not what you see on the surface, right? So similar to the design process here, when you find your job, it's all about understanding yourself, ideating yourself, testing yourself, right? Improving yourself, and then implementing the best version of you in the interview. If you don't pass the interview, that's fine. You start again, right? You make yourself better, you ideate again, you test again, you implement again. So it's again and again like a circular process. So UX design and UX career, especially early career, is actually very similar. So this is a big takeaway I want all of you to have. And then some of you might be interested in like some actual statistics. If you're attending this hackathon, right, this designathon, this is a very hardcore event. So I'm sure all of you are very interested in becoming a UX designer. So on average, right, I know a lot of you are HCI students right now or undergrad students who are interested in potentially being like a UX track. So on average, for an internship or a new grad offer, within our own internal data, right, out of like 200, 300 students we've coached in the 3 to 5 year time frame, for an HCI student, it usually takes around 6 to 8 months of dedicated prep, coaching, and hard work to get the offer they want. So that usually includes working on their portfolio, their resume, their interview, getting the experience they need, getting the coaching they need. And then another data I want to talk about is people often wonder, like, how competitive is UX, right? So if you're just starting out your UX career, this is something you probably want to get answered. So I'm also going to provide some rough estimate statistics. This is, of course, within the US only. So if you're not looking for jobs in the US market, this data can be very different. But on average, yearly, this year probably a lot less because of like hiring freezes and like cuts. So maybe this year it's like 4,000, 5,000. But usually yearly, there is 7,000 plus UX jobs that are newly announced, right? So think of that as whatever you may, like it's not necessarily big, it's not necessarily small until we put into perspective. On the outside, you can also see for new grad and intern roles, there is actually quite a lot. So if you worked with Chanry before, if you look at the UXGO job board that he updates weekly, you'll see probably this year already, there has been a total of maybe 600, 700 like new grad intern roles total. And then of course, remember this year is a very hard year in tech, right? A lot of layoffs. So generally on an average year, around 1,500 total. If you think of between contract, between part-time, the number may be a bit higher or a bit lower, but this is a good estimate. So let's look at like how many applicants there are. So on average, every year, there are around this many applicants. So if you combine this data, right, these are applicants for people who want to do new grad and intern. So there are about 35,000. So that means if you want to like break out of the surface, right, if you want to be on the peak here, you need to be generally the top 4 to 5%. So that may seem very scary to a lot of people, being the top 4 to 5%. That may seem like very challenging, very hard, very difficult, a very, tough statistic. But something you need to remember is not everyone reaches their goal within the 6 to 8 month. So sometimes it just takes people longer to, reach their goal. So that is absolutely okay, right? There is nothing saying you have to find a job in 6 to 8 months when you start preparing. But I want you to all remember this statistic because all of you are competing today, right? A hackathon at the end of the day is a competition. So I want all of you to try your best and see if you can place in the top 45% of the competition today, because there are about 200 people competing today. If you place on one of the top 8 teams, it generally means you're in that range, right? So let's look at some other stats. Even within UXGO ourselves, this is a more accurate statistic. Only around 20% of our members get offers in their first 6 months, right? So only about 20% of people reach their goals in their first 6 months when they do our classes, when they do the coaching and work on their interviews. However, something for you to all consider is when we expand that to a 2-year time frame, people that stick with us, people that stick to their own learning, people that keep working on themselves, by 2 years, over 80% reach their career goals. So you can see there's a big discrepancy because remember the iceberg effect? A lot of people, when they run into their first issue or their first challenge, rather than thinking about how they overcome, they just think, oh, all these other people are getting offers, they're getting jobs. I only have 45% chance. There's so many applicants, so I'm just going to give up. So more applicants probably give up finding their jobs than actually finding the jobs. So when you get to the second year, when people keep working on their goals, you can see the number of people who reach their career goals gets much higher. Because remember, even for really great HCI students to reach their goals, it still takes almost 6 to 8 months of dedicated prepping and coaching and hard work, right? So these are things that people don't see on the surface. So that is why I really encourage everyone to do their best, work their hardest, and then just try to see what you're able to get done in 24 hours. Because we have around 200, maybe even more attendees today. And then for 50 to 100 teams, if you place top 8, that means you're ranked 10 to 15% of all competing teams. So this is a good kind of test for you to see like how competitive you are in the current UX world. So moving on, and if you have any questions about anything I just shared, please type them into the YouTube. So moving on, this is like the section 2 of today's presentation. I know a lot of you might say, well, that's kind of like easy for you to say, right, Leon? Like you've done a lot of great internships, like you have a very easy career. Sometimes when recruiters talk to me, recruiters say like you have like the dream resume that everyone wants. You worked at all these companies, even when you're in school. So something a lot of you might not know for me is even when in school, I was working full-time, right? So I did part-time school and I worked full-time. So I have a lot of work experience even when I was 18, 19 years old, right? So people say like, oh, that's very easy for you to say. But something I want to emphasize is, as a coach and as a designer myself, I am not someone who has survivorship bias. So I'm not telling you it's easy to be the top 5%. I'm not telling you it's easy to be the top 10%, because it is clearly not, right? So what I'm telling you is you need to be prepared to put in the hard work, because I can tell you right now, it is very difficult, right? Because a lot of people are competing. And I am not someone, like if you look at my experience, I'm not someone who thinks it's easy to break into the UX. Every position I had, every position I've done in the past, I had to work very hard to make sure I always was a better version of myself to get to that place, right? So whether that's working with like Huawei before, whether that's working with Oculus in startup, whether that's doing Google Daydream, Amazon Expedia to GoDaddy, a lot of that people think is like, you need a job, right? And if I have a job, I can find another job. And then there's this interesting kind of meme where people say like, oh, I don't have experience, but you need to get experience and then you work. So people think there's this dilemma. But if you really think about it, everyone starts somewhere, right? And then it's all about you to make it better so you can go to the next big thing, the next big thing, the next thing you want. So for me, what a lot of people don't know is I actually don't come from an HCI master's program, right? That's not a luxury I had. So I come from an art background, because when I wanted to do my HCI program at the time, the first time I applied, I was rejected, right? So that's why I had to work extra hard full-time to be able to pay for my own tuition so I can work in and study in the field I want. So by getting more experience, paying for my own tuition, studying part-time, I finally was able to get into the UX HCI program that I loved, interaction design at UW, right? Some of you know it's a great program. So you can see, like, I am not someone who has it very easy. I worked very hard to hit every small goal that I set, right? So it's okay to not be where you are at that you want in this moment, right? So a lot of you talk about like, it's already March and April. If I don't have an internship, am I still going to be a UX designer? Did I like lose all hope? Like, of course you can, right? Because remember, if we look at the data above, a lot of people are going to end up eventually giving up, right? So the applicants each year, a lot of them, over half, I would say, or around half, end up going to giving up, right? So as long as you're someone who still wants to succeed in the future, it doesn't matter how much you've succeeded right now, right? You might say recruitment season is almost over for this year. If I don't have an internship, what am I going to do? There's always new opportunities, right? You can work on a client project, you can freelance, you can do your own passion project, you can do this hackathon, right? There's so many things you can do on your own. Whether with our UXGO network, or such as great school events like CreateSC, right? There's always new opportunities you can find. And on the company side, when hiring is not their priority, that does not mean improving yourself is not your priority, because you can still work on that, right? You still have the chance to make whatever you want to happen to yourself. It all just comes down to how badly you want it. And you need to understand that this needing experience, needing a job, everyone starts at the same place. And don't follow people, like don't listen to people that have been very successful and tell you like it's easy, just do what everyone else is doing, just do your portfolio, do your resume, you'll find an internship, you'll be fine. Because as I showed you in the statistic, that's not the case for UX, right? You have to go above and beyond, because things are going to be competitive. So you need to think about what you want to do to be ready for it, right? So just to quickly show you, for some of you who are still looking for jobs, whether it's new grad, whether it's contract roles, whether it's internship, take a screenshot of this if you want. So I'll zoom out so you can take a screenshot. Look at these things. Make sure you think about these things when you're finding your job. So I'm not going to cover all of it today, because I don't want to cover too much of the details, but just take a screenshot, look at the things you should do right now if you are still looking for a job. And something I want you to pay extra attention to is when you're applying to jobs, try to split them between like tier A and tier B. If you've worked with Shanri before, you can ask him a lot more about this. He's working on something similar himself. So for tier A jobs, they're usually your dream company. You want to spend all the time on it. Read the description carefully, edit your resume, customize your cover letter, don't doubt yourself, do your best. Tier B, maybe you don't care as much. Just apply it, track it, apply it, track it, apply it, track it. The last thing I want to emphasize a bit more is I think LinkedIn and like competitive analysis, so to say, for job hunting is a very dangerous and bad thing for all students. So you don't want to follow how others walk, is what I say. You want to focus on your own journey. If you focus too much on the numbers like these, like how many jobs there are, how many applicants, like how competitive you are, how long it takes people to get offers, you sort of lose track of what really matters to you, right? Because at the end of the day, once you become the ideal version of yourself and you look back and you put everything in timeline, it makes sense. But everything before that, right? We don't really talk about it, we don't really think about it. So it's really about focusing on your own design journey, right? So now on my resume, on my LinkedIn, you see this ideal kind of design lead. You're like, oh my gosh, like he has such a good career. I wish I can be like him. But at a certain point, right, I didn't want to be like myself. I wanted to be someone else, right? Because, like I was doing like filming stuff. I was doing like art background. It's not what I really want to do in the design role. But one experience through the next, right? A lot of it being unpaid, right? I've done a lot of startup work. I've worked back in China for 100 RMB a day at a design agency. So that's about like $15 a day. So it's probably like the money I made, I could buy like one Big Mac meal, right, per day. This is very difficult work I've done. And I had to commute like 2 hours to do it. So you go through all that people don't really know about. So it's all about focusing on your own journey. And then one day you'll be at a place where you're very happy with that you can help other people, right? Whether it's teaching at schools, doing workshops, having my own Figma course, things like that. So don't get limited by competitive analysis. And this is especially easy with like social media, right? You hear people share their offers and you focus too much on that iceberg effect, right? That's all you see on LinkedIn. And you're missing out on really the bigger picture and what you should be focusing on because it's all about your own journey. So think about this with today's hackathon. If you have 24 hours to compete, would you be focusing on your own project or would you be focusing on what others are doing in their project? So the answer is simple, right? You would be focusing on your own project. If you only have 24 hours, why, like to be frank, like why in the hell would you even care what others are doing? Because you just want to do the best you can. So think about your career the same way, right? You have a limited time to become the best version of yourself. So it's okay to occasionally be curious about like, oh, these are the other UXGO members who are working here. These are people on my LinkedIn network, they're working here. But at the end of the day, everyone is on their own unique journey. So something I talk about in a lot of my other workshops or talks that you might have heard at like RISD or different schools is that I talk about, remember your life and career is an infinite game. So that means you're only competing with yourself, right? Your life isn't like a basketball game where the game is over and a team wins, right? Your game is only over when you don't want to be a UX designer anymore, then you lose, right? Because then you're never going to be a UX designer. So as long as you still work towards your goal, you can always win, right? That's the idea of an infinite game. So now after, a lot of like troublesome and turbulent career in my own early time, after a lot of struggle, I'm very proud of a lot of products I've shipped and got to work at, right? I was the founding designer for one of Expedia's Maps team, right? I grew the design team from 1 to 4, right? After I left that team, now I work with GoDaddy. I'm the product design lead for their payments on commerce team. You can see I get to work on like really cool devices. So I work with like hardware, industrial design. I get to work on the OS system. My team manages almost 25% of all the payments GoDaddy does. So we have like 20 million customers using the things I design every day, right? For Expedia, there's probably like 100 million users who use Maps like every month, right? Unique users. So you can really make a lot of great impact to the design world in a short time. And then that's why I really want to emphasize just before I finish today, in your hackathon, in your own career, be yourself, right? It's your own unique UX journey. And then in 5 years, 10 years from now, a lot of you will probably even be better designers than me. So I'm interested to hear your own story then, right? And I would be very grateful if in your early career, I'm able to give you a little bit of support, a little bit of help, and a little bit of guidance to be the best version of yourself, right? I don't want you to be me. I don't want you to be anyone else but your own. So that's sort of the mentorship philosophy and coaching philosophy of why we founded UXGO, right? We have different coaches. We have about 20 different UX coaches, UX researchers, UX designers. We all work at different companies, right? Because when you work with us, we want you to work with a trained, qualified coach that you feel like is someone who understands you, right? Because I don't want everyone to be the same version that they see someone on LinkedIn. Really try to be who you think you are, really try to make your own UX path forward. And then when you work with us, you can always work with someone that you believe in and you feel like has their own inspiring journey. So whether you're not on our Slack, we encourage you to check out UXGO. And then even if you're not on our UXGO network, there are so many great resources nowadays, such as like within your own school, like Create SC, right? You can always reach out to mentors, partners, friends, designers, and then really understand that we're all on this journey together. And we want to really build empathy towards each other so we can all overcome our unique struggles individually, but together as a whole. So that's why I'm very excited for this hackathon. I'm very excited to be your keynote speaker. I'm so excited to see all the projects you will do. And then I'm excited to work with the judges and see how our judges will rank all of you. And lastly, if you have any last questions, please share it in the YouTube. I'm trying to end this presentation at exactly 30 minutes to give you all the time you need to do the best in your hackathon. So this is exactly 30 minutes now. I will be signing off my keynote, but please share any last questions on YouTube right now, and I will be happy to answer them either offline or quickly for you right now. So Shanri, how does it look? Are we ready to move on to the next section, or do we have any quick questions for me?
Yeah, we do have a couple of quick questions. Really quickly about the prompt, we're going to be releasing that later on after our workshop, and a little bit of information, probably around 1-ish. And then we do have a question from Frian, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Is there a high threshold for non-UX major students to get into this industry? And do you think that unpaid real-term projects is more competitive than conceptual case studies and resumes?
Okay, that's like almost 3 questions in one, so I'm going to answer it in 3 parts. So the first question, let's actually talk about the unpaid one first. I think that's something a lot of students are considering, right? So for the unpaid one, I think you need to have a very clear goal of why you're doing it. A lot of companies nowadays are notoriously known for exploiting people, right? Like they're giving you unpaid work, but it's just straight up work that it's like marketing or maybe not even related to design. It might be like graphic work. It might be like copy editing. So if you do any unpaid work, talk with the manager, talk with your mentor, talk with the designer on the team, and then make sure you tell them, this is what I want to get done in 3 months, right? I want to be able to build a case study with this. You be upfront, right? Tell them how your work is valuable. Tell them how you're qualified. If they're not really willing to work with you to be able to make a project out of the time you spend, I would say be careful of that unpaid work, right? So know what you're worth when you do the unpaid work. When I'm spending like 2 hours a day commuting back in China, working for a design firm, I was making 100 RMB a day, right? But I thought it was one of the best experiences in my life because I learned how to work in a fast-paced design agency, and I worked for really good clients, right? I did a lot of work for free, basically, but I was able to work with clients that later on helped me get a job at like Huawei, Neo. So it was a good experience for me. Like getting paid wasn't my motivation. So you need to know, like, if you're getting what you want out of the role, that's up to you. If you don't have that unpaid opportunity and you do your own passion project, I say try to make it something in the real world. So don't make it purely hypothetical, right? If you do something that's purely hypothetical, it's also okay. But then I want to make sure you work with a real mentor, because if you work on a purely hypothetical project on your own, then I would say it's kind of like done in a vacuum, and usually it's not really recommended because you can be spending your time somewhere else, right? First question, high threshold on non-majors. I would say it's probably lower than you think. If you compare with like CS, right, computer science developer, it is almost impossible for non-majors to translate, right? Because it's kind of like math. There is a right or wrong. For UX design, product design, there isn't a real right or wrong. It's really about your skills, right? So if you come from a business background, like if you look at some of our coaches, here, Michelle comes from a business background, right? So she didn't do any master's program. She didn't do any boot camp. She comes from a business background, and now she's a designer at Amazon, and she interned at Tesla, right, during her undergrad. If you look at Cinia, she's a content designer, right? She does UX writing now, but she comes from a I can't remember exactly what background she came from, but she also was not a UX, so to say, like program. And then you have people like Qingyang, who works at Expedia as well, that does come from like a master's HCI program. So really in this UX world, you don't have to be from a UX background. It's really more about like the experience and skill sets you have. But ideally, if you have the opportunity and you can do a UX program, it is probably a little bit more competitive than doing something that's super unrelated like business or math or things like that. So that's my quick answer for that. And then one thing to add is there's a lot of different UX roles. It's not just design. There's research, there is content strategy, there's content design, there's UX writing. So if you come from an English major, maybe you can be a UX writer. If you come from a psychology background, maybe you can be a UX researcher. So think about that as well. Okay. Any last questions, Jean-Marie? I know we are almost at time.
We have one on the job search timeline, but if
Okay.
you are able to, let's try to answer that off in the chat.
Okay, I will answer it in the chat as well. I'll try to join YouTube live and then I'll try to answer it myself.
Great, sounds good.
Okay, I will pass it back to you all then.
Awesome. So it looks like we're ready to move on, but thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Leon. I know we all learned something new today, and we appreciate you for being such a great resource to our attendees. And we're looking forward to seeing the ways everyone can integrate those great accessibility points into their projects. So again, thank you so much. But first, in order to be able to create anything at all, we'll dive right into the basics of prototyping and application design with the Figma workshop. The prompt will be announced right after the workshop at 12:45, so be sure to stick around until then to hear about the submission guidelines and ask the Create.SC team any questions you might have. But without further ado, I'll pass it on to Shwarni, who will lead the Figma workshop.
Great, thank you, Brian. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing screen. So let me know in the chat if there's any time you can't see what I'm working on. But to go ahead and get started, the thing to know about Figma is that you could use it in a browser across different browser types as well as different operating systems. There's also an application version. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to be working on the browser version. And what we have on this screen, if you come from a creative background and you've worked with applications in the Adobe Creative Cloud like Illustrator or Photoshop, you'll have some sort of familiarity. Figma is a design tool that you can use shapes, you can use text, and different tools to create visual components on the screen. So let's see, on this left panel here, just to get a lay of the land, I'm going to run through this as quickly as I can, but on the left panel we have these things called the layers panel. This will tell you if I open up this little nest, you'll have different layers, and within each layer you could put things within those layers, and that's called layer nesting, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. On this top bar, we have some of our controls, sort of like the Microsoft ribbon panel on their Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, etc. So we have our, under this Figma button, we have just sort of the file edit view. When you're strictly pixel pushing and designing, you don't necessarily need it that often, but it is there when you need to adjust your view or that sort of thing. So getting started, let's take a look at what Figma has to offer. Figma is built around the concept of frames, shapes, and layers, like I mentioned. So the frame is in this little pound symbol or hashtag. You could also use keyboard shortcut F. And what frames are basically, if you want to think about it like Illustrator's canvas, their artboards within a canvas. You can click and drag and create spaces. You can also use it to, you'll see on the right panel in this design, you could have different form factors. So you could use a frame for specific Apple devices, or you can do it for, tablet, desktop dimensions for different MacBooks or a regular 1080 or 1920 by 1080 screen, etc., etc. There's a lot of different configurations you can have with frames, But the key concept is you can use it to create the space in which you'll kind of draw and design and create things off of. So let's take a look at basic design tools. This is really the backbone of all design. This is pretty much the most atomic level. So if you want to think about a design being the planet Earth, right? How did we get to planet Earth? Well, it started with a bunch of little text elements, little pen diagrams, and little squares and circles that you draw on the screen. Those came together to build. I'm not a. Maybe the Earth was not a great example, but these pen tools, shape tools, these come together to create elements. Elements create organisms, and so on and so forth. So whenever you're designing, one thing that I always like to ask myself is, how can I make this thing in the most elegant way? And this gets into slightly more complicated, more advanced topics in Figma. But if you've, like I mentioned, come from a creative background that you've used Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, you might be familiar with the concept of grouping. Grouping, as I'll show on the screen, is, let's say you have a couple of rectangles on a screen, you throw in some text, and you want to like move everything together, like this. One way, as you just saw me do, is you just select everything and then move it. The weakness of this is, well, if I just want to select one thing right now, only that one thing will move. But how do I get everything to group together? Well, in most programs, you do Control G or group selection, and then you have that as a group. But what auto layout provides you is essentially a very similar thing. The difference is it provides and it builds in alignment, it builds in layout, and it it also builds in just a easier keyboard shortcut to use once you start to master this. So let's say I auto layout all of this. You'll see that it automatically space things out and align things to a specific order. And I can go ahead and make edits to this order and make things a little bit tighter. I could also control, how things are aligned, whether I want it centered or bottom aligned or top aligned, etc., etc. I can create rows from this. Let's say I want these 3 squares and this layout on one row, and then these 3 squares on the right. Let me just color them differently so they're a little bit more distinct. And this align in one row too. I can select the elements that I want to be in that row, and I could press Shift A, or I could right click and select, where is it? Auto layout. Add auto layout. Now, it doesn't immediately take effect until I do it for the other selection as well. I'll grab those 3 rectangles and the layout layer. I'll add auto layout. And then in this master frame, you'll see on this left layers panel that I have frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3. Now, in frame 1, you can change the direction in which things are, well, laid out. And that's how you get things to adhere to different rows. So it's a different way of thinking about how to organize your layers, how to organize your alignment and spacing, and it makes things like the 4.4 pixel or 8 pixel grids really easy. You don't have to literally nudge pixels, or if something is not a discrete integer value, which messes up your layers, you could easily configure that using auto layout. So I'll dive a little bit deeper into these. This is just to introduce these high-level concepts, and I'll tie these all together in a quick card building exercise. But let's first talk about components real quick. Components are a way that we can reuse, reduce our time on designing, and recycle designs using this little button, which if I select on any element, you'll see comes up on the top nav bar. You'll see that when I hover over it, it says create component. And you also see that it has it has the keyboard shortcut, Control, Alt, or Option if you're on Mac, plus the K key. So components, like this slide suggests, you can really easily create buttons, cards, your nav bar, your footer, data table styling, data visualizations, all that and a lot more. So I recommend people using components instead of, let's say I want to reuse this. Right now it's not a component. So if I make it over and over again, that's fine. But if I make a change here, let's say I want to make this center square in this first row a different color, that's not going to propagate into everything unless it's a component. So to quickly demonstrate that, I'm going to quickly make this into a component and then duplicate that out. And then in the master component, as soon as I start changing the colors around, you'll see that the other, basically it's children is what it's called, will be able to inherit those properties from the master or the main component. So yeah, the final big section that we want to cover today is prototyping. Prototyping is what brings your designs to life. It's what actually we are able to, once we go into the prototype, we could start looking at this slide deck. It will open up a new tab. Hypothetically, oh, that's not what I want. I want this to be not in a screen. I want this to be in a presentation. So you'll see that this prototyping, it allows you to view a presentation or view things, view your designs as particular devices, and you can add in interactions like clicking through a slide deck. You can create using different interactions, like I could make this to on drag, so I could literally like, let me restart this. I can drag things. And you could integrate different prototyping types in order to bring your designs to life. If you were making a mobile app, for example, you can put in that swiping gestures for some components, and you could manipulate that to feel like the real thing when you're prototyping and presenting it to stakeholders or whoever it is that you're presenting your designs to. So let's get into this a little bit and talk about how to make a simple card. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this previous example work, and let's quickly talk about what we expect going into a card. So I'm going to build this really quick and dirty just to show you a really simple and sort of the easy solution of how to do it before I go into more in depth of how to properly build it with auto layout and other tools. So let's first bring in a little rectangle because we want our card to be able to have an image. So in this right hand design panel, I'll come to the fill property for this rectangle and give it a image. Currently I don't have an image. I'm not going to use any placeholders for now. So it's just going to have this checkered background. Now let's add some detail into this card, right? Let's add a card title, a card description, and in between those two, I'm going to put a little card subtitle. Now the subtitle, I'm going to make that pretty small. I'm going to make that like 32 points. So see, that's a little small. It has a little description. And let's say I have a little button, and a cancel button. Now, I'm gonna put all of these together into a group by giving this a little dark background, and I can just press Ctrl G, and I could call this entire group my card. Now this isn't the prettiest thing, and that's sort of intentional. You'll see that I run into a lot of issues. Like if I want to rescale it, it doesn't fit very properly. You'll see that the card title begins to morph a lot. You'll see that if I wanted to change the padding so then the image is square rather than having the top padding or the side padding uneven, I want that to be even. It's not entirely easy to do this unless you go into the correct layer and then you nudge things around, and then you press Alt to make sure that things are not crooked. But you'll see that when I hover Alt or Option and hover over a specific element, you could see that there's these orange tags that come around the borders that'll tell you how far away the edge of one element is to the other. So to demonstrate that, I have 2 rectangles. If I press Alt, I'll see that it is 218 pixels away, and that happens dynamically. So if I move that closer, we'll see that it's 77. So that's what's happening when I have this card element selected. I have this rectangle 3, I'm going to rename to background. If I hover that to the rectangle 2, which I'm going to rename to image, it'll show that it is 43.83 pixels away, but I want that to be a nice round number divisible by 4 or 8, depending on the grid system I want to use. So this is a lot of information. I want this to basically be as simple as possible. And to do so, let's add a little bit more detail to our card before I remake it using auto layout and make it into a component. So let's say, as an example, we want this to be, I'm going to grab an image of like Tokyo. Let's see, I'm just going to grab this and throw that into this image, just so we have, something visual to look at. And we're going to call this Tokyo. We're going to call this, let's pretend it's a date. What is today's date? Today is the 8th of April, 2023. Welcome, or let's pretend this is a like a diary or something. So you're just outlining. I went to Tokyo a couple of months ago. So we have a couple of lines, and in our description, and we have like an exit button and an enter button. Let's say by clicking the enter button, we're going into the journal entry or something. Okay, so you'll see that this is pretty messy. Like, I could adjust things so then it's a little bit more lined up. This looks a little bit better, not the best, but it's getting there. Okay, now let's rebuild this using auto layout. And then I'll show you the difference between what is going on between these two elements. 8 April 2023. I'm just going to go ahead and copy the text as plain text. And I'm going to have an exit button and an enter button. So, and then I'll take this image actually. So let's say that I want the card to be defined around the image size. Currently, it's this odd number, 702 by 680. Let's make that a nice square image. So let's call this, I don't know, 700 by 640. Oh, that's a great thing to call out. If it does this, if you don't have constraint proportions checked, it will constrain the proportion. So what that means is, like, right now I have this unchecked, so I could scale this image however I want. But if I have this checked, then it will only scale like by the aspect ratio of what the image is. So make sure that that is unchecked if you're adjusting it that way. I'm gonna adjust it to 700 by 450 and then lock that constraint value. And then to build the card anatomy, I'm going to simply select these 3 elements and then press Shift A to auto layout those elements. I'll do the same, but separate it out for the buttons because those are different. And I'm going to go ahead and rename these layers. So I'm going to call this like button CTA or something. And I'm going to call this card body. And then within the card body, I'm actually going to add an additional nesting of auto layout by pressing Shift A to just the first 2 layers, because this is kind of the header information. And in the header, I could rename these titles to card title, to date, and then this I went to Tokyo for a couple of months as the card description. So now that I have these, what does that actually allow us to do? Well, I can move things around and square things away. So first, let me adjust the typography a little bit to match what I had on the left card example. So I'm going to go make the date 32 pixels size. And then I'll come to this card header and give it a distance of something like 16. And what that does is gives us, let's see here, gives us a spacing of 16 pixels between the header and the date line. And then for this bottom text, we could give it a spacing of like 40 or something, just to give it a little bit more breathing room. And then what we can do is combine the two auto laid out elements, like the card body and the button CTA. And this will create the body of the card down here. So now I'm going to recreate this as card body. And I'm going to rename this. Well, actually, no, it's already image, so that's fine. So now I could square things away and then adjust auto layouts so then things are a little bit more responsive. Selecting just the card body element, I can change the constraints. There's 3 options available now. There's fixed width, which means that no matter how I resize it, it will always retain that width. You'll see that it has a width of 908, but if I change the largest parent in this nesting to now like 796, that card body that I set to fixed width is still 908. So there's a couple of options. There's hug contents, which means that it's kind of dependent on however much text I have down here. You'll see that it changed from 908 to 1301 because I added a bunch more text because it's hugging it. The last option, which is my favorite, is fill container. Fill container means that no matter how wide I make this outer component, its inner component will inherit however big the outer component is. So there's a layer of inheritance, if you will, that is really just dependent on the layer nesting. So really cool feature that I really like. So what we can continue to do is allow this text box to fill only the card width, so only to the width of the image. And to do that, let's see if I'm on the right layer. I want this to hug contents vertically of the card body. And then for the card description layer, I want this to fill contents. And then I need to go back and change it again to hug contents. Okay. Looks like it's not cooperating. Let's look into why. If I change this to hug contents, there we go. And then this body is also hug contents. Okay. So now what we should have is if I select this topmost, oh, it looks like it's not doing it. Yeah, there we go. So what was happening just now is, and one of the drawbacks of auto layout is you have to go back and make sure that all your layers and all your nestings are configured correctly on the constraint level. But once you have that set correctly, you get really responsive cards that allow for a lot of control. You'll see that if I have a card that is like super narrow, all my text description inherits that and scales proportionally to however big I make the card. So let's make sure that we have some of our things configured correctly. I want the buttons to be on the right, the bottom right. And to do that, what I'll do is make sure that they're, I'm going to select this as fill container, and then I'm going to put everything in the bottom right corner. And then from there, I'll decrease the distance between these two elements. Let's take a look at this layer. There's the exit and enter button. I want the distance between those two to be a lot smaller, something like, I don't know, 40 pixels. Putting this all together, I'm pretty much done with my card body, and I have this card image. I'm going to press auto layout again. To do that, I can right click and select add auto layout, or I can press shift A. And then I have this, it frames everything all in one. I could now rename this entire thing as a card. Now you'll notice again that there is a lot of detail in terms of the options. You have stuff like horizontal padding, which as you see me drag up and down, or I guess left and right, that it creates spacing between everything that's in the card and its bounding box. Same thing with the vertical padding for the top and bottom margins. So let's keep this as something nice and square numbers. I like 40. And then we can then apply a little bit more detail by using this fill property. The fill applies it to the layer that you have selected. So to demonstrate that, let's say I have this button CTA layer selected. The fill property is still available. So what you can do is apply a fill there. And as you see, the entire bounding box of that layer is now a solid color of pure white. I can, play around with my color values and select that. And I can do the same on the card level. So I'll apply that white color. I'm actually going to make it a little less white. I'm going to make it like that. Just this eggshell white or something. And then I'll select my text layer and change that all to some darker color. So you'll see that these things are coming together now. And within the frame, you can also apply an additional layer of complexity by using these rounded corners or the corner radius to give it a little bit more life. In this case, we could give it something like, 24. And in the image layer, you could also provide a little bit of padding. Let's do 12. You don't want to use the same numbers. So like I use 24 for this outermost edge and 12 here, because if I did 24 out here, or any higher value, you'll see that it doesn't match the roundedness of the outer property. So that's just a quick design tip. Have a smaller value in general when you have it bounded within a card. So then it looks like it actually fits. So let's go back to the button CTA and take off that ugly red color, especially since it doesn't belong. And then let's apply the same text color. Let's grab this 1B, 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 and apply it to this pure white, pure white text down here. So now that we have our card, let's make this into a component. Now, components are really tricky because they potentially can get really messy, but the more comfortable you get to it, the more familiar you'll be, and then the less reliant you'll be on groups. So all I did there was just press whatever element you have selected, press this create component button, or use the keyboard shortcut Control Alt or Option if you're on Mac, and then K. You'll see that now it's purple. What's up with that? So now that it's purple, we have this, card. I can create duplicates of it and let that just exist out in the wild. And now in the assets layer, I have these local components. So I could create, a couple different pages, whatever it is. And no matter where I am within this doc, I can drag a card out. But let's go back to page 1 and let's talk about what we could do with these cards. Normally, if you didn't have these as components, you could apply whatever customization that you want to these cards, which can be really cool. So what I'm going to do is actually convert one of these to a non-componentized card. And you'll see that I could do things like, if I wanted to, I could change the image size. I could change the, font color of some of these. But you're not going to be able to do the same thing with a componentized card. So it provides a little bit of customization and constraining your design so you don't have too many versions and messy designs. So Kelly asked, what is the proper way to unframe or remove the auto layout? That's a great question. So let's actually duplicate one of these cards, and I'm going to uncomponentize it. And the reason, part of the reason why I'm doing this is so that I can demonstrate how to unlink the auto layout. You can right click and you can detach the instance. What this will do is make this a non-component, but you'll see that auto layout is still applied here. So all you have to do is whenever an element has auto layout applied to it, when you select that layer, you can come to this right design panel under the auto layout section and click this minus button. And now auto layout is not applied and I can move things around in this frame. You could also do the same by right-clicking that layer and remove auto layout. And you'll see that there's also a keyboard shortcut here that's Alt-Shift-A, or if you're on Mac, that's Option-Shift-A. So thanks for the question. That's a good one to know when you're trying to think of ways to undo auto layout if you feel like it's too complicated for you. But let's talk back a little bit about creating instances within components. The cool thing about these components is if I make changes, I could name this, what's another city? Kyoto is one, right? I think I think that's how you spell it. Let's change the date here. Let's give it a real date of April 12th and make this like 31st of March instead. So you could have these all, you could have all of these cards now, and they're going to be standardized, and you're not going to have any trouble with resizing things. They're going to be basically a set size. You don't have to play with pixel pushing if you have a different version of your card, like I have in this bottom example of like, oh no, I've worked on a card and now it's 609 pixels high instead of the card height that I want, which is, for example, 984. So now that you have these cards, let's talk a little bit about instances. Instances is a very cool way of working with cards. What they do, they're also actually correctly called variants, so component variants, allow you to have, well, different variations of the same component. So this card is massive. For those who were paying attention, these pixel sizes are, way too big for example, your phone. So to demonstrate that, let me grab my frame layer. I'll go to a phone and I'll say like, okay, even if I had the iPhone 14 Pro Max, right? So imagine you have your phone in your hand. This card is going to be huge. It just won't fit. But let's say you have your desktop. For example, you're working on a 1080p computer. I mean, this card is still massive, but it could fit in your large screen. So let's make a card that is suitable for mobile. One way to do that is you can add a property. You can add in that card component a variant, and you'll now see that now this card border expanded a little bit. It has this default, and it has this option to add variant. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a variant. On the right-hand side in the design panel, you'll see that there's these things called properties now. A property is something like size. We have a default size, and then we have variant 2. So let's go ahead and rename this to a small. And let's actually make this a little smaller. Okay. So let me configure some of these things so then they all fit. Let me change the text size to something like 32, 16, and 20. And for these buttons, let's make them also 20. So now that there's a lot more room, what we can do is configure this to be a little bit more responsive and fill this card a little bit so then it fits on more of a mobile screen. So you'll see that I need to make quite a few adjustments to make this work, but that's part of it. Part of the fun is to make sure that things fit properly. So you'll see that this exit and enter button are a little bit too high. One thing that you can do, and one of the strengths of auto layout is, well, let's say I want this to, the card, I want the detail to be up here, but I want the buttons to be lower. One way to do that is when you're selecting the space in between, you'll see that I can drag it, I can move it so it goes down to where I roughly want it. Alternatively, you can just type in auto, and it will automatically push it to the maximum width. So let's change this back to 0 so you could see the difference again. I can scroll this around. I can push it to around like 50, which is close to where I want it. I'm going to go back to 13. But if I type in auto, it'll push it, and you'll see this diagram here. It went to auto spacing align left. So again, if I double click that, now it's back to a specific vertical spacing. Changing it to auto will change it so it pushes that out, and then the icon went from the top left to it having it spread out. So let's keep playing around with this card. Let's make it a little bit more balanced for a mobile view. Let's give it a spacing of 12 pixels all around. Now you'll notice that these rounded corners kind of look ridiculous on a smaller format. So let's tone it down a little bit. Let's give it like 8 pixels for the entire card. And then for the image, see how now its roundedness looks a little weird. It feels like it doesn't fit. To fix that, all we do is select that card layer and nudge that down. You could drag it down to about 4-ish, and that looks like it fits a little bit better. So let's keep it like that. And let's throw some of these cards onto my pretend phone. So to demonstrate the power of components, I'm going to drag my massive card into this phone. You'll see that obviously it doesn't fit. So what I'll do is actually use this property, the size property, and select the small variation. You'll see that now, I mean, it's still pretty big, but the idea is still the same. You can now have this card on your phone. You could configure it back. Oops. You can configure it back and forth between large and small. You can adjust variables, by the way, with components and variations, not just size, but things like colors or prototyping states. So, to demonstrate that, let's make a duplicate of this card. And let's actually move this off of the screen. Actually, sorry. What I want to show is if I have like a carousel. And to do that, I'm actually going to make this card even smaller. And you'll see that by adjusting the main component, the changes are automatically updated to every single one of its instances that were created. So even if I have a bunch of instances created across different pages, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many there are either. If I make changes in the main component, those changes will trickle down, as you can see, like that. Okay. So let's make these cards do sort of a carousel thing. So one thing that I can do is create a bunch of cards, and I could auto layout all of that into a horizontal or card carousel. There we go. And I'll load that up into this frame, and it'll look something like this. And I can duplicate that into the other two cards, into the other two phone screens. And what I can do is drag these around so then we can kind of see, as if this was like a stop motion animation, from one screen to the next, we see the card carousel move slowly to the left. So to prototype a little bit of action, there's multiple ways of doing this. The first way that I'm going to show you is a relatively simple way to do it. First, I'm going to select the card carousel. I'm going to actually give this a little bit more spacing so that we can see what's going on. There's these options when you're in the prototyping tab. We've gone from design and now we're on the prototyping tab on the right. We can select an element, and you'll notice that on its sides, like the top, left, right, and bottom, there's this little plus thing that happens whenever you hover over it. You can click and drag that around to different frames or to different elements within itself, but in this case I'm just going to do the different frames. And this gives you an option to apply a little bit of interactivity. So let's play with on drag. By default, Figma will give it Smart Animate. Smart Animate is just its way of allowing it to kind of apply a little bit of smart animation so you don't have to think about easing or pixel pushing, some of that stuff. So let's take a look at Flow 1 and see how that looks. You'll notice that I can drag this thing around, and this is not the best representation of it, but let's go back and see what we can do. So with this one card, we could actually adjust how it scrolls and how it behaves by removing its previous on drag. So now it's kind of working on its own. We can give it a scroll with parent, and for overflow, we could give it horizontal overflow. So now when we go back here, let that reload. We can give it the option to move around. Let's give it both directions. So now you can see that there's a little bit of a dragging functionality that you can do there. So that pretty much sums up how you can quickly prototype components and put these things onto a screen. When you're working and prototyping your screens, you could apply a little bit more customization, obviously, and you can also, add more detail to your screens. For example, if I'm on my iPhone, you can do things like a search bar. Let me quickly make this an example. But I want to give a moment to pause and basically conclude this section and really cater to a Q&A. So if you have any particular questions, we can look at that. And if you want me to prototype anything in particular, we can do that as well. If not, that's fine. We still have quite a bit of time, so I could cover really any topic that may be of interest. If people are confused about something, I'm happy to go back and dive a little bit deeper into how to work with components, work with auto layout, whatever it may be. If you want me to go through a particular workflow, or if you're just dying to try something out in Figma but haven't had the chance to go through it, I'm happy to do so as well. If not, I'm going to keep going into this card example and think a little bit more about what I want to do with this fake iPhone mockup. So let's see. To give this card a little bit more life, I'm actually going to give these button CTAs more of a button definition. So what I'm going to do is actually create a button component and allow this to give it a little bit more animation as well. So to do that, I'm going to just create a basic button. I'm going to grab it and call this button text. And I'm going to auto lay that out and call this button. I'm going to give it a frame and a different color. Let's say our primary color is some sort of almost like a baby blue. Maybe a darker blue. Let's see. Yeah, let's give it a little bit more of a darker vibe so that it contrasts a little bit better. We do have some questions in chat. Kelly asks, in what situation do we use groups instead of frames? That's a great question. I actually had this come up recently. If you're working with really large layers that need to move a little bit together. First off, yeah, Leon mentioned that both can be used for auto layout. That it's not an exclusive thing where you have to use groups or have to use auto layout. You can use a combination of both, or you could use both within each other as well. The other scenario is if you need visualizations that aren't necessarily adhering to a grid. For example, maps. Maps is a great opportunity to use groups because of unique geometries and stuff like that. MSL asks, would you show creating responsive buttons with states? That's perfect. That's actually what I am going to do. So let's talk about this little button. I'm going to give it a little bit of auto layout. And these are just going to be text buttons since I don't want to work with icon libraries yet. So to do so, let me add a little bit more detail into these buttons. I'm going to give it a body of 16 pixels for the typography, and give the line height something of 20. That way, the line height and the entire bounding box of this text is going to be an even number. That way, and this number is also divisible by 4. So it's really easy to work with the 4-point grid if you have that set up. So now let's talk about the vertical padding. I'm going to make that something like 8 and something like maybe 16 on the horizontal padding. And that way we have a little bit more spacing. There's a lot more breathing room on the sides, and there's breathing room on the top and bottom as well. And because the card that we're working with is already rounded, let's add some roundedness to this card as well. Let's do in multiples of 2 to see what feels right. 2 probably does not feel right, so we'll bump it up to 4. That feels a little bit better. Whatever numbers you use is up to you. In fact, you could go up to basically like an infinite number just to get it fully rounded, if that makes sense for your project. But in this case, I'm just going to stick with 4. So let's look at these button states and how to make these responsive. Currently, it's responsive in the horizontal direction. So what I'm first going to do is right-click, create component, and now I have my basic button. I'm going to create a duplicate just to demonstrate how it is responsive. I can type in exit, and you'll see that it automatically resized to form around the word that's in it. It could be something really long if I wanted to type out the alphabet. F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V. It doesn't matter. Whatever I type, it will always adhere to the card, or sorry, the typography definition. So let's do button body, and you'll see that it even does so in the vertical direction. I have multiple lines. I mean, you generally don't want these for your buttons, but it can work in that direction as well. If you want that constraint, so it never overflows, you could go to your typography definition, click these 3 dots for the type setting, and then under resizing, there is a truncate version. And that allows it so no matter how much text you have, you'll see that this has a bunch of text, right? Doesn't matter, it will always stay in one line. So that's how you could get like a responsive button. This should be HUD contents. Oh, oops. This should be fill container and then fixed height, or darn, truncate text. Okay. There we go. So now it only moves in the horizontal direction. So let's go back and add a little bit of interaction with the hover, with the active states, and all of that. So I'm going to go back and reset this. So to do that, I'm going to right click it and reset all changes. And now it's back to this button text. What I essentially want is, by default, this button looks like this. This will probably be, let me just make an annotation. It's going to be your active. This is going to be your hover state. This is going to be your on click. On click means like literally while I'm clicking. And then there is selected. This is generally 4 states. What I like to do for these, let me first just duplicate these all. And then what I'm going to do is, for demonstration's sake, just start changing it up to see how I would do it. Maybe hover state is generally like a little bit darker. On click is even darker than that. And then selected is, let's, I don't know, let's give it a stroke. Let's give it actually black since it's going to be on a white background. And let's call it like that. You could style these however you want, depending on your project. It really doesn't matter. In this example, though, that's why it's going to be a little bit messier. So now I know that whenever it is a default active, I want it to be this style. whenever I'm hovering over this button, I want it to look like this. Whenever I'm on click, it will be an even darker color. And whenever I'm selecting it, whenever that option is selected, it will have a stroke around it. So what I'm going to do is come back to the button and actually start adding the property. I'm going to add variant. And I'm just going to go ahead and add 4 because I already know that I want 4. And in this state, for property 1, I'm going to call this button state. There's the default. It's fine to keep it named default. In my head, I know that is analogous to active. In the second one, I'm going to go ahead and call this hover state. I'm going to call the third one on click. And I'm going to call the fourth one selected. And then I'm going to apply the same exact styling that I gave to each of these. So for the selected one, I applied a darker, I applied a black stroke. For the on click, I applied a light, I applied a darker background. And then for the hover state, I also applied a darker background. So now we could get into the prototyping. This is the fun part where I can click one of these buttons and then dragging one of these little pluses, drag it to the next button that I want it to, and then select the prototype to while hovering. While hovering, I want this to change state to the hover state one. And then I just go down the list and basically do that. So logically, while this is hovering on tap, I want this to change to on click. Finally, let's see. Sorry, I'm going to change this to while pressing. And then the last one I'm going to change to on tap. And then I'm going to loop this back so then it has somewhere to return to if I keep clicking on it. So once this is selected, if I'm tapping it again, it will go back to its default state. So let's take a look at this. I'm just going to drag this button. Oops. In the design tab, I'm going to drag it back to our example phone. And we'll see it appear in this prototype. I don't know if you can see these changes very well. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. This is going to be a bad example. But just so you can see the color differences. As I am hovering over it and clicking it, and when I release my click, it will change states. And then now you can have these different states all in one instead of creating a bunch of different screens just to scroll through how you want your button to look. So I'm going to undo all of that, reset all changes. So now on our screen, we have these cards. We have this button that can cycle through states I could play around with. And one thing that I want to call out is that you can create components within components. You can have nested components. So I created early on this exit and enter button. But now I have this button component. I could actually make that more real. So what I'm going to do is go to this layer, delete the enter and exit text because, you know, I have these buttons now. I don't need the text. And I could scrunch these up. So I could call this like, I don't know, 4 pixel difference. You'll notice that the cards are massive, so we'll make some adjustments there too. We'll call this exit. We'll call this enter. And then now all the cards will have these buttons that we can play with. You'll see that that they're there, and they inherited all of the states that we created earlier on. Great, yeah. Thank you, MSL, for the question. Keep them coming, chat. We have about 10 minutes left, so now is the time to ask your questions if you feel like you want to get a little bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of Figma. Keep in mind that you don't have to use Figma for your daily design work. These are really analogous. Adobe XD and Sketch have their versions of this, but if you want to get Figma is just a really easy and free tool to use. You don't need a subscription or anything. It's just there, and is pretty much the industry standard anyway. So, okay. Let's see. Let's apply a little bit more complexity into our buttons. Let's add another property of size. So now, let's say I want to add this button into this larger card. We can do that. We have these versions, and I'm going to call these large buttons. And pretty much for each one, I'm going to press K on my keyboard for scale, and then just drag them up. Let's see, what's a good ratio? I'll drag them up by 1.5. And then what I'll do is round out these numbers. 180. I'll do that individually just to give me a ballpark. Ooh, that's not what I want. So I'm gonna drag this out again so I can see what I'm working on. And we'll see that each of these have a weird number. Okay, I'm actually gonna undo it and just do it manually. Yeah, sometimes the scale tool is a little annoying to use. So I'm again gonna drag this out. I'm gonna select the 4 cards I want made large. And I'm just gonna make the text bigger. That would have been easier to do the first time. So 36. I don't want a padding of 20. I want a line height of around 40. And I'm gonna space these out a little bit. I'm also gonna adjust the padding. So this is gonna be like 24 and 12. That seems a little bit tight still, so I'm going to give it 28 and 16. Alright, that feels a little bit better. So I'm going to drag this into the master component for the cards. For the large card, I should say. And do the same thing. Let's see. So now I have my exit button, my enter button, all on the large card as well. So now you have a lot of control over the variants, and you have very easily built-in responsiveness for both mobile and large screens. I mean, although this isn't the most accurate representation since you wouldn't have a card this large, but the idea is there. Great. I'm going to leave a little bit of time for some questions, but in the meantime, that pretty much concludes the workshop, and I want to give the screen back to the wonderful folks at innodatusc and Create SC. So I'll be checking chat, and let's see people come back in.
Great work, Shanri. Great work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shonari, for that amazing workshop. We will allow maybe 2-ish minutes for whatever questions to come on in before we move on to the long-awaited prompt release. So if you guys have any final questions, make sure to share those in the chat. But besides that, definitely a very, very informative workshop. As someone who's been using Figma for a while, I still learn new things. So definitely was very nice. And Figma always has a lot of like hidden things that just kind of come up, like really cool functionalities that, you know, you might not really know. So it's really cool for you to share some of those.
Great, yeah. Figma is definitely a can of worms. I'm still learning to this day. You know, there's especially since they are an evolving product, they have features rolling in that change the landscape and make the workflow a lot easier for designers as time goes on. So, yeah, definitely my favorite tool to work in as a designer.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I don't see any questions. So I guess as somewhat of a reward for, hopping in live, we can just get started with the prompt release so that you guys can be on your way. So let's see. Let me share my screen real quick. Alrighty. And just as a quick refresher, if you didn't already see it on our social media, but we do have a lovely panel of judges that are all amazing industry professionals, with Shang Lu, who is a senior product designer at Kickoff, who was previously at Amazon, Willa Gao, a UX designer at Amazon, and Laura Lin, UX research at Google. So definitely we have a really, really good panel of judges to judge your presentations and your projects for this round. So a lot of their feedback will be very, very useful and helpful, and also in line with industry standards. But yes, and then of course the long-awaited prompt. So definitely, I will actually type this into the chat in case you wanted to copy and paste it, but you can go ahead and take a look at this prompt link. It is a Google Doc, and I think everyone should have access. Yes. And so in line with our theme, which is expressive dialogue, we do have a challenge presented for you, where in which you will be submitting a prototype, as well as a slide deck if you want to, an optional slide deck, even though a slide deck will be mandatory for finalists, and a optional abstract. And I'll go ahead and pass it on to Brian for, oh dear. Okay, let me actually edit that right now. Oh, it shouldn't, huh?
Another wonder of Figma.
Huh? Okay, this is the presentation. That is interesting, but regardless, Brian, take it away.
Cool. Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to go and just read the prompt again. So here's the prompt. So theme is expressive dialogue, and it is pretty much defined as the use of words, sentences, gestures, and even writing to convey meaning and messages to others. Usually it's associated with the character's inner perspective, where we get an insight into their specific intelligence and like sophistication, which is a quality that gives them a better understanding of the world and its ways. And so the process of intelligence and sophistication is often complex. However, teams that have an understanding of the concept can help further build personas that can help better strategize their designs. So what if we develop technology that can help those with communication disorders express themselves? So that's the prompt. And then we have the challenge as well. Anna, if you want to go and just read the challenge.
Yeah, so the challenge in light of this background is to design a mobile app that will help those with communication disorders express themselves through creative digital mediums that can further help them build their sense of community and belonging. So an example of this, which is provided on the prompt document actually, is, for example, a platform that allows those with disabilities to portray their feelings and ideas to an audience through like paintings, or just to, in a way to connect with potential new friends through their interests and their illustrations. So basically a very open prompt for you to, I guess, interpret however you want. And yeah, so we will be taking a few questions regarding this prompt if you have any. So keep those rolling in. Okay, Brian or Shawnari or Leon, if you guys can just monitor the chat for that, I can move forward to some submission guidelines. So essentially, here are the submission guidelines. Oh, you guys got a sneak peek, but basically, currently teams must consist of undergraduate or graduate students with a valid .edu or equivalent email in order to be eligible for general prizes. So as long as one member of your team has a .edu or equivalent email, you are eligible to win a general prize, which are the ones that we had stated previously. And all submissions must be made in Figma, and must include no less than 8 screens prototyped together, which is honestly not difficult. And it's if you just make any like general app, you should probably have more than 8 screens. And then it must contain original content, or Adobe stock images or cited images. So make sure to cite your work if you have any. And then also, you cannot do any work beforehand, and you probably wasn't really able to without the prompt. So definitely this must be done within the allotted event time. Submissions will be due in 24 hours at 1 p.m. tomorrow, PST. So everything that we're operating in is PST, since this is run under Innovative Design at USC, which is in PST. Yeah, and we will provide the submission. The submission link should actually be linked in the prompt, but there's also a bit.ly for that. But actually, we have a new announcement, and this is with the generosity of UXGO, and advocates from UXGO who wants everyone to be able to participate. So we will actually allow non-student teams to participate. So this could include recent graduates or just anyone who's willing, who wants to try their hand at a design challenge. So those who are non-student teams, which is no one on your team has a .edu email or equivalent, you are still eligible to participate and you will still be graded within the general pool, but you probably are only eligible to win $100 with 50% off the lifetime membership at UXGO, which is still really, really good. So definitely if you're looking to participate as a non-student team, this is your opportunity to do so. A disclaimer for this is just that you still need to, in order to win this prize, you still need to be within the top 8 finalists, just because you are competing with everyone. And the goal of this different prize pool is really just to ensure fairness within this competition. This is a competition for beginners, for students, for people who are just entering the industry. So definitely we don't want people who are already like super talented and like have a lot of experience to compete. But yeah, any questions? Oh, someone said, are we able to use UI kits if we cite them? Yes, you may use UI kits. And you can also cite this in like potential like your presentation or maybe even in your abstract as well, if you didn't want to directly put it into your application. So can graduate students be graded? Yes, graduate students are actually now will be considered with everyone else. So definitely, as long as you can prove your student status, that will be eligible. Are we allowed to use AI? Okay, that is a really interesting question. Um, I think yes. This is just actually just by my discretion, because this is not a question that we've had in the past. Just because like it is a tool that is available on the internet. So if you are able to use it and would like to utilize some of that, you may, but you cannot allow we will not allow it if it's like AI generated like the full AI like platform or whatever. Like you have to do your own individual work. So you do still have to work as a team. So I think this was specified earlier, but it has to be in teams of 2 to 4. So I guess a team is also just like a partner, potentially. So I think I sent a GroupMe link earlier, but I will also send it again in a follow-up email. But if you want to find a team, you still have the opportunity to do so in this GroupMe. Alrighty, and then I don't see any other questions. Anyone have any questions about the prompt specifically? Also, a submission link, if you wanted to just take this and leave, is bit.ly/creativec 2023 submit. So it's a submission link, and yeah. Any other questions, concerns?
Oh yes. For day 2, I'm gonna share in chat the link for people to come back.
Yep, and we will also be emailing that out. So no worries if you did not catch it. And of course, we can't leave without, bombarding you guys with all of our social medias, websites, whatever. So definitely go check out our social media, our website. And of course, also check out UXGO. UXGO is a really, really cool platform and definitely really helpful to members. So definitely go check them out. And yes, does the app have to use existing technology? Wait, what? Does the app have to use an existing technology? I do not understand the question. Um,
I think there has to be some component of feasibility. If you're referring to like experimental VR, for example, I think that question is getting at like using technology that exists in the real world in order to apply to their project.
um, we'll say like yes for now, but also that depends on like case by case. If you can demonstrate like, I don't know, potential or um, you know, execute nicely, I think we'll take it. But it depends. Does the target audience need to be specifically people with communication-related medical disabilities? Yes. So that is within the prompt. It will be specifically targeted towards those with communication related disabilities. Um, yeah. But again, like this prompt should, the goal of the prompt, at least when we wrote it, is in hopes of making it flexible enough that you're able to interpret this however you want. Um, So yes, and I guess some tips that I would just throw out there as since we're here, and it's also some stuff that I believe Leon also mentioned. Um, but definitely everyone needs to remember to do your research beforehand. Don't just jump right into like, oh, let's do some visual design or whatever. Like I think this prompt really requires an understanding of of your target audience, an understanding of the needs, and what your product will do to fill those needs. So definitely make sure to do a lot of research. Can we include the research in terms of slides and prototype link, or just the app prototype will do? Uh, Oh, you mean can you include the slides within the link? Um, yeah, no. The prototype is not the slides. The prototype should just be your mobile app design. Um, but definitely include your research in slides if you choose to submit slides. Again, you will be required to present your prototype should you make it to like the final round, or be one of the top 8 finalists. So I would recommend actually building out a slide deck, even if it's after the fact, to include the research. Is there any specific communication disorders? Um, no specific communication disorders, also because there's a wide variety of various disorders, and also like a spectrum of such. So definitely up to your own interpretation, and also you can be as broad or as niche as you would like for this prompt. And
And
again, oh, go ahead,
sorry to
Leah.
interrupt. And I think we had one question earlier about how will the top 8 be notified? So I believe that will be through email after they submit, correct?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Yeah, and I think everyone who is attending, we would recommend them to come back to listen to the top 8%. I think it will be a great learning opportunity too. So even if you're not placed in the top 8, I highly recommend everyone tune back in for the top 8's presentation.
Absolutely. Um, could you please clarify the difference between disorders and disabilities? These two seem to be very different, seem to be different concepts. Um, I think, okay, I think you can interpret this in whatever way that you would like. I think they might be different concepts, but are still go hand in hand in many ways. Um, my understanding um, is that disorders, I think disabilities will have like a functional like, or like a I guess like you will not be able to like some kind of functional disadvantage, I guess, versus like disorder potentially is like in relation to illness, is my understanding, but that is only my own understanding, and so you can again interpret this however you would like. How is our presentation of design process versus the final product evaluated? Okay, you can see this in the rubric actually, which is actually linked in the prompt. But I think my interpretation, is their presentation is only evaluated in the sense of I guess there's 2 rounds of grading. So first round is to figure out who the top 8 finalists are, and then the second round is to like judge like top 3 and like honorary mentions and things like that. So in the first round, we will take it. So if you do submit a presentation, because it's optional, we will take it into account, but not that much. It will just contextualize your project, which can be useful. Your presentation is a lot more important in the second round, even though it is based off of like your final product specifically, but how you present it and your design process makes a bigger difference when you're actually presenting it in front of the panel of judges. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions? Does all the links work for everybody? I really hope so. Yes, and you guys should all be able to see the rubric as well. We want to be as transparent as possible when it comes to our grading process. So this is a really good way of kind of looking into like how we think about things. So I would actually highly recommend for those who are just like starting the project, like I don't know where to start. Yeah, look over the rubric first, look over the prompt, do some research, and then target it by finding a problem. So part of the efficacy of your project is also considered. Yeah, how do neurological disorders that affect communication fit into our prompt? Yes, they do. Yeah, so I think, yes, we have maybe 4 more minutes for questions. So definitely put those in. And also if you still have questions after the fact or just whatever, where can we find the rubric? It is at the very last thing. I'll paste it at the front of the prompt so that you can kind of look over it immediately. But yeah, you should be able to see it in the prompt. Any other questions before we release you guys into the wild? All right. If not, we will stay on for the remaining 3 minutes, as promised, in case you and your team have any final things to ask about. And definitely make use of the GroupMe. The thing about the GroupMe is you don't have to just use it for team formations, but you can also use it to talk to each other. Where is the We group link? It is here. Let me send it actually again in the chat. Again, all of this information will be sent out in a follow-up email. So do not worry, but here is the link if you wish to join. The thing is, this might be a competition, but honestly, I see it as also a way to meet other, fellow designers, fellow aspiring designers. This is a really great way to just kind of chat with people and like ask people. You can even like, just like ask people like, oh, like, how are you guys like, approaching the prompt, things like that. Like, I think we don't have to be. We're not gatekeepers here, so definitely utilize the GroupMe to its fullest potential. But yeah. Two minutes to get in your questions.
They're ready. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's what it is as well. One more minute and we will. Yes, very nice. I love the sportsmanship there. Yes, good luck to everybody. Happy designing. YouTube Live is such an interesting concept.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I like it. Alrighty, it is 1 p.m. and so that marks the end of our opening session. Be released. Good luck, and we can't wait to see what you guys submit to us. Alrighty, I will stop share.
Great. Good luck and have fun, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Let us know if you have any questions, and yeah.
Alrighty.